Chairman.
Well, hey, Dana.
Morning.
This hearing will come to order, and good morning and welcome to today's hearing on the 21st century water planning. And I thank our witnesses for accommodating our change of schedule. I thank my partner, Mr. Hall, for on short notice allowing us to change the schedule. The reason being, Prime Minister Gordon Browning will be speaking to a joint session later today. We are not allowed, and we should not be meeting during that time. And so we do not want to hold the witnesses up by, having to wait for that uncertain time to be over with. And it does mean that we're a little bit out of sync, and so our members may be coming and going. I thank Ms. Johnson and Mr. Robacher for being here this morning. But the most important thing is we're going to get your testimony on record, and that will help us move forward with our legislation. Now, the most recent outlook issued by NOAA's National Center for the Environmental Prediction indicates that drought conditions will continue to plague a number of states and regions throughout the United States. California, the Central Plains of Texas and Oklahoma, and the southeastern states of Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida are all likely to experience drought conditions in the coming months. We need to take decisive action to ensure that the United States can meet the water challenges of 2009 and beyond. Last Congress, this committee brought attention to the water supply challenges by holding hearings and introducing legislation to address technological and strategic deficiencies at the federal level. Economic recovery legislation recently signed by President Obama included significant and long overdue funds for states and localities to improve water infrastructure. Upgrading and repair of the water delivery and treatment systems will conserve water, improve public health, and create jobs. This is a good start, but we must do more. We need new tools to evaluate the status of our water infrastructure and our water supplies. We need effective and efficient technologies and management practices to improve water quality, and we must learn to use water more efficiently. We need a national water policy, and research and development must be an integral part of that policy. Research and development are key ingredients to sound water resource management. At the end of the last Congress, I introduced legislation to establish a National Water Research and Development Initiative, and I reintroduced this legislation last week. H.R. 1145 incorporates recommendations from a 2004 report by the National Academies of Science and from witnesses who appeared before our committee in the last Congress. This legislation will ensure that 20 federal agencies, and that's 20 federal agencies, that are conducting and funding research and development activities on water will coordinate their efforts to achieve the goal of managing our water resources for the benefit of our nation. I think one way that we get more money into research is by using the money that we have more efficiently and through that coordination. We have an excellent panel of witnesses with us this morning who will share their views on what we need to do as a nation to manage our water resources effectively and efficiently. And I want to thank you all for being with us. I look forward to your suggestions for addressing the challenges of water management through the federal legislation and leadership. I now recognize our distinguished ranking member and my good friend, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you are correct. As a matter of fact, this is the fourth hearing we're holding on water issues in the last year and a half. And I think it's the second at the full committee level. There's not one district I'm aware of that's not had to deal with a water problem in the last few years, whether it's because there's too much of it or not enough, and I've had both. I introduced a bill several years ago, and you helped pass it through to address the drought over in East Texas and then South Tennessee. And as you could guess, at Paris, Texas, an old man said, after I'd introduced it and told him about it, he said, "Congressman, can you make it rain?" I said, "Yes, sir." And about 2.5 years later, we had a 5-inch rain. I called him, got him out of bed about 3 o'clock in the morning. I said, "Mr. Rasco, I keep my word." You have to remind him, But I'm pleased that the committee is taking such an interest in such a very important topic, and I really commend you for continuing the work that started some time ago. 3 years ago, we passed and the President signed the National Integrated Drought Information System Act of 2006, legislation that we introduced to help our constituents and many others deal with the devastating effects of prolonged drought. In the 110th Congress, and again at the beginning of this Congress, this committee moved 2 water bills. My produced Water Utilization Act and Mr. Matheson's Water Use Efficiency and Conservation Research Act, and the full House agreed to send these bills to the Senate on a voice vote last July. Energy and Environment subcommittees received testimony on draft legislation that's now the Chairman's National Water Research and Development Initiative Act, the bill we're here to discuss today. And this amount of legislation, including this very important legislation, our committee has moved on water issues in the past few years with this, demonstrates our awareness of the need to address the critical issues our nation faces with regard to water quality, supply, and availability. I've heard it said that when one bottle of water like this costs as much as a good bottle of beer, well, we got to get pretty doggone serious about it. The House is not alone in recognizing the problems we face with water. The Senate sent S-22, an omnibus lands bill that includes the Secure Water Act, a piece of legislation that attempts to address shortcomings in our national water research strategy. Considering the Chairman's bill we're discussing here today, I hope we have an opportunity to collaborate with the Senate to create a truly comprehensive and rational approach to water research. The testimony we'll hear today from our very qualified panelists will help us better understand what opportunities exist for the coordinated federal research. It may also be wise to hear from the agencies that are most involved in federal water research. With the new administration in place, I think we would benefit from learning how they intend to approach water research and what kind of legislation would best help them implement a coordinated federal strategy. Comments from the Office of Science and Technology Policy as well as other agencies might help in our authorization process. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, and you're absolutely right. We do need to get information from those sources so that we can have the best bill possible. Members may submit additional statements, and they will be included in the record at this point. Our first panel, and our only panel here today, I'll now introduce our witnesses. First, Dr. Henry Vaux is Professor Emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Peter Gleick is President of the Pacific Institute for Studies in Development, Environment, and Security. Dr. Mark Modzelewski is the co-founder of the Water Innovations Alliance. And now for the ladies' side of the table, Ms. Nancy Stoner is a coordinator of the water program at the Natural Resource Defense Council, and Ms. Christine Furstoss is the general manager of technology at the General Electric's Water and Process Technologies Division. As I pointed out earlier, this was not a planned effort to segregate you, and we're glad you're here. As you know, we try to limit our witnesses' oral statement to about 5 minutes, and all your written statement will be a part of the testimony. And when you complete your testimony, we will begin the questions. So each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel, and we will start with Mr. Vaux.
Thank you for introducing me, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before your committee this morning. At the outset, I should state that I was the chair of the 2 National Academy of Science committees whose reports are referred to in Section 2 of the bill. And although I do not formally speak for the National Academy of Sciences or the National Research Council, my testimony is based upon the analysis and recommendations contained in those reports. We face many difficult challenges in this first decade, or at the end of this first decade of the 21st century, but the challenge of husbanding and managing our water resources is a longer-term challenge than many of the others and will remain with us throughout the remainder of the century. The ease or difficulty with which we adapt to this growing and intensifying water scarcity will depend critically upon our willingness to invest in additional science. The federal water research portfolio today suffers from a variety of ills. Too heavy an emphasis on short-term research and operationally oriented research. It is a portfolio that is out of balance with current water realities, and the research across the board suffers from the absence of any agreed-upon agenda and set of priorities for water research. The major explanation for the state of our water research is, as you said, Mr. Chairman, not so much a lack of money as a lack of coordination and a lack of communication. The proposed legislation would, if enacted in its present form, create a strong and appropriate basis for addressing the problems that currently characterize our national water research efforts. I have detailed the significant strengths of that legislation in my written testimony. Let me turn, in the time that remains, to 4 suggestions for ways in which the Act might be further strengthened. First of all, a funding suggestion, the provision or authorization of additional funds both for research and to defray the costs of implementing the Act. With so many agencies, I think it's more likely that we would get a productive response to the Act if there were money involved, and if that money, the availability of it, was made contingent upon progress in meeting the goals and objectives of the Act. So additional funding is one suggestion. Additional research outcomes. Subsection 2C2 is reasonably comprehensive, but a 9th category is needed, focusing on the social sciences, research in the social sciences, needed to facilitate the development of innovative water management institutions. And a 10th category is also needed. That category focused on understanding the hydrologic and water use implications of climate change. Let me also urge that you add a subsection emphasizing modern research themes in an effort to encourage the agencies to depart from the reductionist approach to research that has characterized the last century. Those modern research themes require an interdisciplinary approach to research, require a research framework which is cast in a broad systems context, requires the specific acknowledgement and characterization of the uncertainty associated with the research results, and also acknowledges the importance of being adaptive. A final suggestion for improvement in the legislation is based upon the need to involve academic researchers in the efforts called for in the bill, because academic researchers are well equipped to undertake the longer-term research. And the most straightforward way in which this could be done would be by including directly a role for the Water Resources Research Institutes, which reach out to all institutions of higher education, colleges and universities in all of the states and trust territories. The institutes were most recently reauthorized in Public Bill 109-471. I urge also that you consider making one or more institute directors member of the interagency committee, either ex officio or as regular members. This addition would be especially important since it takes advantage of established relationships between the federal government and the academic water resources research community. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before your committee.
Thank you for those very good ideas. I'm glad you read the bill. And Dr. Peter Gleick, you're now recognized.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having me testify today. I hope at least those of us at the table have read the bill. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to offer comments on the bill. I also would like to note at the outset I spent some of my early time doing research at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I remember my time in Tennessee very fondly. The water crisis around the nation is growing. The need for better and more coordinated responses is urgent. I think we all understand that. We've long known that more coordination among federal agencies is going to be critical for dealing with water issues, but that coordination remains an elusive goal. And new challenges face us, climate change, new pollutants, decaying infrastructure around the nation. My written testimony addresses these issues. I'm not going to repeat it here this morning. What I'd like to do is highlight a few points. In particular, let me start by saying that many of our water problems are local and have to be addressed at the local issue, at the local level. But we do have a responsibility to develop appropriate national policies as well. And at the moment, these responsibilities, as you note, are split among at least 25 separate federal agencies, and they don't speak well to each other, they don't speak often to each other. And the goal of this bill to improve that coordination, to develop a consistent research agenda, to use our limited resources efficiently is an excellent one. As the bill notes, some effort in this area has been made by the SWAC committee, the subcommittee on water availability and quality under OSTP. I think the research results, the research recommendations produced by SWAC in September 2007 are an excellent step forward in setting a national agenda, and I think they've been complemented by reports from the National Research Council that Dr. Vaux talked about and from the General Accountability Office. I think those all together provide a superb starting point for moving water research forward. It's not clear to me that a new subcommittee or a new interagency committee is necessary if the idea is to strengthen SWAC, and I think that might be an appropriate way to move forward. But whatever approach is taken, I would urge that this committee, this organizing group, have a separate research budget of its own, either to give out in a competitive grants situation or to manage itself. Second, I think this group should include outside experts from either other federal agencies or from non-federal agencies as well, something that SWAC has not done at the moment. The National Research Council previously concluded in its 2004 report that such outside advice would be enormously valuable. Third, the bill calls for an interagency committee to, quote, establish the priorities for federal water research. I actually believe those priorities are fairly well established already from SWAC's previous work, from the NRC, from the General Accountability Office. We know what needs to be done. What we need is the funding to go ahead and do it. And so I don't think we necessarily need to call for a new assessment. I think we should instead focus on the sections of this bill, C2C in particular, that calls for, quote, a strategy and timeline to achieve the desired outcomes. Fourth, the explicit outcomes in the bill, I would argue, are unnecessary if we adopt the recommendations of SWAC and the National Research Council. Conversely, if we're going to include specific research outcomes in this bill, I would offer 4 explicit recommendations for additions. The first is that the call for a national water census is a great idea, but it needs to include a census of water use nationwide, not just the water resources of the nation, but actually how we use our water resources. That was recommended by SWAC. It didn't make it into this bill, and I think it would be easy to add. Second, the national census is urgently needed, but I would recommend that it explicitly be called for as a census, that is every 10 years or so, and an explicit budget be provided to do the national census. Third, missing from the water research outcomes, but included in every recent call for research around the nation, is an assessment of the implications of climate change on the nation's water resources. And I think it would be easy to add that outcome as well. Fourth, Section D4 calls for development of innovative technologies and tools to enhance water use efficiency. That's a great idea, but it should also call for an expansion of existing tools in the water efficiency area. Let me close by simply saying we also need, in addition to better coordination on research, we need some things not addressed by this legislation, such as a National Water Commission. H.R. 135 has been submitted at various times in the House. It's passed the House. I urge a National Water Commission be resubmitted and redeveloped as a way to move forward on things not going to be covered by the current legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Modzelewski, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, I thank Mr. Chairman and the members of the committee. I'm honored to have this opportunity to appear before you today as the Executive Director of the Water Innovations Alliance. The Alliance is the policy voice of the world's water researchers, technologists, and innovators. And our members are looking to move forward to try and address many of the problems that we have here today. I'd like to actually skip over the statistics, which I think we all know so well. and really get to the point that, in order to advocate and address the problems that access the developing world and our own significant infrastructure needs and needs with water, we must either spend hundreds of billions of dollars, some people putting the number at trillions of dollars, in order to fix it and modernize the system, or for a fraction of that, we can invest in funding that will advance water technology and innovations and spend the money smartly, which is something we all need to focus on. Unfortunately, despite many of these maxims that water is the next oil, that water equals life, nobody ever seems to put their money where their mouth is in the water sector and actually spend the funding along these lines. Corporate and government R&D spending in water compared to other industries is quite low. I could speak to one area that I'm very familiar with for formerly running the Nano Business Alliance. And in nanotechnology, every year the federal government spends in excess of $1.5 billion. Corporations putting significant amounts along those lines. If you look at that in water, you really don't see those kind of funding levels hit. And you also see the funding, again, speaking what Dr. Vaux said earlier, really put to near-term problems. You don't see a lot of mid- and long-term research developed along those lines. And in fact, we're still really treating water not that differently than we could have a couple hundred years ago, where we actually put chemicals or poisons in the water, or we try to force things through small holes. And we really haven't looked to address water in a more modern way with more modern techniques. And the lack of funding and the lack of a funding portfolio that's spread and diverse in this effect has surely caused that, and is clearly a hindrance to us being able to deal with things along those lines. We strongly agree with the Chairman's call for interagency collaboration and coordination, as well as increased evaluation and funding. We strongly support the proposals here under consideration, but we do have actually a few areas that we'd like to make suggestions for development in the bill, and some potential changes in the bill, one of which would be assessment. To date, there have been several efforts to evaluate the state of water infrastructure and the research spending in America, including the work of the national academies and several private organizations. None has been thorough enough to create a clear picture and to develop a comprehensive response. At this time, the essence, we believe that it is necessary to get the task done quickly, thoroughly, and accurately. We suggest a national water census, which Dr. Gleick had touched upon earlier, but we would certainly agree with him that usage and regularity should be a point of development as far as that census goes, where we should look at the availability of quantity, quality, consumption, recharge capacity, and threats to groundwater and surface water resources as well. Another area which we think is deeply in need of investigation is the information technology area of water. One key area where there's been a lack of innovation in water is information technologies. Little has been done to create a common system of measurement, evaluation, and reporting. Common standards do not exist. Even with current infrastructure, filtration, and treatment technology, overlaying an effective IT infrastructure and management system whereby we could actually evaluate what's being done, what's being used, and have a common language of reporting and sharing that information, by some estimates could lead to savings of 30 to 50%, even with the current infrastructure issues that we have. A national smart water grid, if you will, would be an incredible way of better developing water, understanding our water use, and being able to understand what's working and what's not working as far as our new innovations and technologies that are applied. Another area I'd like to point to is NSF centers. This is something that's been touched on before as far as research centers, and these certainly could be done in conjunction with the current university centers or a build-out of the centers. But right now we have one at the University of Illinois, which I believe sunsets in the next 3 years. Having nationally backed long-term funding structures for the research and innovations of water would be an incredible development that we can move forward on. The government of Switzerland, for instance, a country that's actually quite water rich and much smaller than ours, spends $100 million a year in these type of government centers, and would be a model to look at for developing out our own system. And lastly, a national water pilot testing facility. One issue that we seem to have right now is that regulation gets in the way of a lot of innovation being out there, and too often the innovation is occurring at the benchtop in laboratories rather than understanding how it would work in a larger system. So the development of such a water pilot testing facility would be integral to actually getting new innovation available and in the market. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Stoner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Hall, and
I
members.
believe you need to put your microphone on there. There we go.
Very good, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the Natural Resources Defense Council to discuss the changes facing U.S. water resources today and the role of scientific research in addressing those challenges. I'll provide a brief summary of the issues presented in more depth in my written statement. First, water resources in the U.S. are stressed. Population growth, urbanization, and agricultural runoff continue to pollute rivers, lakes, and coastal waters and deplete surface and groundwater resources that provide safe, sufficient water for human and ecosystem needs. There are also new stressors, as my colleagues have mentioned, such as climate change, which affects water first and foremost among all natural resources, with increasing droughts, sea level rise, extreme storm events, and increased stream temperatures. We can't continue to use the strategies of the past and hope to overcome these and other emerging challenges. New strategies, new technologies, and even new ways of thinking are needed. That's what scientific research is all about. Second, water is valuable. It's essential to life, to our very existence, and the foundation of every civilization. It's easily worth billions, if not trillions of dollars each year to the U.S. economy. One study by a team of economists estimated the economic value of the decline in water quality in the U.S. from 1994 to 2000 as $20 billion. With the economic crisis that the U.S. is facing, we can't afford to throw away valuable natural resources like clean water. Third, research and development creates jobs. Jobs for scientists, lab technicians, manufacturing jobs, labor jobs, jobs that feed families and contribute to the long-term health and well-being of the nation. The global water and wastewater infrastructure market is estimated at $3 trillion. The U.S. needs to invest in research and development not only to protect our own natural resources, but also to bolster that sector of our economy. We're currently losing jobs to companies overseas because we're not developing and marketing state-of-the-art water and wastewater infrastructure technologies. This is a market in which the U.S. can and should lead the world. With respect to the legislation, H.R. 1145, the National Water Research and Development Initiative Act, it would step up and coordinate science-based research in water. It would ensure that federal dollars are spent more effectively and would identify specific water research outcomes. I want to add the voices of my colleagues in suggesting a couple of additional outcomes. Several have mentioned already climate change water interactions. I think that's very important for a research outcome. Another that hasn't been mentioned this morning, I think, is advanced treatment technologies and pollution prevention strategies. Treatment may be old school, but sometimes it's helpful, and we need new treatment technologies, particularly ones that use less energy and produce better results. That's a good area for the research agenda as well. I think it's an excellent start, though, on a holistic, cross-cutting water research agenda. I also want to second the comment made by my colleague, Dr. Gleick, about having the census address water use. Often in the U.S., we don't have information about how much groundwater in particular is being used. That information is necessary in order to ensure that we have sustainable water resources for the future. So I commend you, Mr. Chairman, on this legislation, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Furstoss, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Gordon, Mr. Hall, members of the committee, it's a privilege to share with you GE's thoughts on the National Water Research and Development Initiative Act of 2009. I feel that this act would represent a very positive step forward in strengthening the planning and implementation of water research and development across the nation. The federal government's role in providing structure and oversight will help accelerate new developments in a more coordinated way. If we truly want to change how our nation thinks about water, or Chairman Gordon, as you so eloquently put it, sound resource water management. It's going to take a community. This is a community of government, national labs, academia, institutes, and industry working together in unison with prioritization, with common goals, with the ability to determine which technologies will be able to be implemented, what will be supported, and can we work together. Companies like GE are investing in technology development for water reuse, water conservation, and water purification. But when you have a community that's both strong in cultivating and developing new ideas and equally effective in achieving the end result, success is bound to be a sure thing. Giving industry the opportunity to work with academia, to work with institutes in a coordinated way will surely further this initiative. I was very excited when I read in the bill some of the prioritization areas, including the water census, including, very importantly, standards and methods of measuring water purification, an area which I feel has been ignored. As we continue to legislate, as we continue to drive more and more companies, rightfully so, to reuse water, to cleanse water, it's very important that we understand how to measure, how to achieve the levels that we are asking for. GE is currently working on a number of different areas. For examples, our scientists and engineers are partnered with the Department of Energy to develop new technology for the treatment of impaired waters for industrial cooling applications, thus being able to use more waters in a sound way. The goal is to minimize water discharge and enhance water reuse. We're also working with the Department of Energy to optimize the system for wastewater treatment, which would help to reduce the cost of energy for systems run by municipalities and industries. Ultimately, it's going to come down to how these technologies are deployed. Are they meeting the proper regulatory requirements? Do they measure impurities in a way that ensures water is safe? Are they minimizing energy usage so that industry can deploy these technologies in a cost-effective, environmentally friendly way? This last question is especially important. One of the biggest impediments to deploying new clean water technologies is the high cost of energy. This bill will go a tremendous way in helping to focus the community on those sorts of questions and answers. In closing, it makes sense to have a fully coordinated strategy for addressing our nation's clean water needs. And this will require more direct involvement from the government as well as industries such as GE and our competitors. There are robust R&D pipelines, but there can be more. There is not a lack of ideas for cleaning water. It's helping to prioritize them and determine how can we help the universities, the small companies, or the large companies like mine to get them into the marketplace in a way that is reliable and sustainable. Working together with the government and other key stakeholders, we will have the community we need to successfully carry out a national clean water research and development initiative. Chairman Gordon, Mr. Hall, members of the committee, thank you for the time and the opportunity to provide our comments.
Thank you, and for all our panelists for being here. Now, at this point, we will open our first round of questions. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Dr. Vaux, in your testimony, you indicated that the importance of obtaining and managing and exchanging data on water resources. In addition to my bill, H.R. 1145, there is legislation pending in the House, S-22, that authorizes additional funds for the USGS streamflow network and for expanded monitoring of groundwater resources. It seems to me that the coordination of agencies' efforts directed by H.R. 1145 and the expansion of these two key data resources in S-22 are complementary. Would you like to make a comment on that by virtue of the research you've already done?
Well, I would agree that they're complementary, and I would agree that they ought to go forward in a fashion that is coordinated, again, and not independently. So the U.S. Geological Survey is the agency with the most experience in terms of data collection, data management, and making the data available to users. And one regrettable characteristic of our data acquisition program is that there has been a significant disinvestment in it over the last 2 decades. These bills, with appropriate authorizations and follow-on funding, would go some ways toward rectifying that disinvestment by investing further. My only concern is that it not proceed independently of what you're trying to do, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Vaux. Mr. Baird, or Dr. Baird would be very happy to know that you wanted to include the social sciences in the various categories. And you had also mentioned additional funding for the coordinating agency. What are you envisioning there?
An off-the-wall estimate would be simply $2 or $3 million annually to support the efforts of the coordination effort. My experience has been, or my observation has been, that when you ask the agencies to take the costs of these kinds of coordination efforts out of existing funds, they lack enthusiasm. And I think by providing a little money, one would generate more enthusiasm to achieve the goals and objectives of the bill. And also, there may be a need to provide some additional research money along the lines that Dr. Gleick suggested.
Thank you. That's very good advice. And Mr. Modzelewski, you had mentioned that 30 to 50% savings could be made in water consumption by using IT. That's a pretty extraordinary number. Can you go through that a little bit more with us with some examples?
Sure. And some have said it's more, some have certainly said it's less, but that tends to be the range. Really, right now, there's not really a common understanding of how to communicate water. Communicate about water. Having a sensors network that would be able to give us a far more in-depth understanding of the usage matched against something like a census would allow us to know how much we're using, how much we're wasting, and to be able to address those problems quickly. You have issues right now with, say, a city like Chicago, where some of the estimates are that Chicago's losing as much as 60% of its water before it gets to the faucet. And if you look at a situation like that, where if you had a smart network and a smart grid in place, you would be able to assess where you're losing it, what the cost-benefit analysis is of doing that, and address it. Not to mention usage that's going through streams as it's being used in finding beneficial uses along those lines. Right now, from an IT perspective, we don't, again, have common standards. Often where we're doing readings, we have different systems doing different readings, but yet in the exact same place. You can find a box in a stream that maybe 5 communities have put together various water monitoring and analysis systems instead of sharing that data. And the ability to potentially overlay a smart system where we know where it is, be able to speak to each other about it, and be able to assess how much damage is being done, how much we're losing, and to be able to address those in a pinpoint fashion would come from an IT system, or again, using a term that's become fanciful right now, a smart water grid that overlays things.
All right, so are you talking about implementing existing technology or having to develop new technology?
It wouldn't really need a huge jump from technology we currently have available. It would certainly be needed to be adapted to a water system, and everyone would have to agree upon the measurements and what all the wording means and what all the reporting would mean within it. But there's nothing about the actual code, if you will, the actual writing of this, that would be new. The only other thing that would be new is actually probably a far more intensive sensor network to be actually take readings at far more aggressively throughout a system.
Ms. Furstoss, since you come out of this division, do you have a comment on that?
The idea of a smart water grid, the idea of being able to implement, I think is a wonderful idea. It does provide challenges, as was mentioned in the sensor technology, in being able to have reliable data. I think the data management techniques, the ability to measure for water usage is there. The ability to easily implement it, I think will take a much more coordinated effort. Again, as was mentioned, how is it measured, how often, the standards, but I do think that the ability to measure water usage, the technologies do exist.
My time has expired. Mr. Hall, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Modzelewski, I appreciate your concern for amounts of money because that's something we have to take into consideration, and we pass any bill, and it's kind of extraordinary for folks like you to come here that are that considerate of our problems. You know, we have a president that's throwing money like mad, the stimulus, and the president and my friend that just left is back in Dallas right now with his bailouts. You know, bailed out $700 or $800 billion, and 350 billion of it just went completely quickly, and where it went we don't know, or what happened to it, and all they said was uh-oh, and we don't know, you know, about that. So I thank you for being that considerate. I want to just say that, but my question is to Mrs. Furstoss. Legislation was introduced and passed in the House this Congress and last Congress to explore ways to utilize and maybe treat the water produced from drilling for oil. That's a big problem for us, and we have some legislation. Chairman and this entire committee helped us pass those bills, knowing of the importance to them. Has GE done any research in this area?
Yes, we have done research and are continuing at the moment to do research looking at produced waters from the oil industry. We're working with, in addition to our Research and Development Center, we're working very closely with some of the oil producing companies to understand how we can purify the waters that are being drawn, the oily waters. Very difficult technology because of the temperatures that the waters are at, because of the consistency when the oil comes out of the ground with the water, or the water that is used to help promote the drilling and really bringing up the oil. These waters are very oily. They have a significant amount of solids. They have a significant amount of contamination. Anything that could be in the ground is going to come up with the waters.
But you feel like they're worth the cleansing process?
I think that for sustainable, we need to figure out how can we clean these waters to be able to reduce the water usage, to be able to reuse them. But currently with the oil content, it is very difficult. It is one of our main area of research right now within GE Water and Process Technology.
None of these waters are being cleaned enough to get to the faucet.
Not to get to
one of the former members.
Yes. Not to get to the faucet, to my knowledge. Perhaps in some isolated areas they are. Again, we are focusing also on being able to reuse these waters. Again, so these operations require much less water usage.
So they're generally relegated to reuse in the oil patch.
Yes.
I think I'll yield back.
Mr. Miller, I don't see you. Oh, okay, I didn't think, okay, you're right. Okay, Ms. Fudge is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am from Cleveland, Ohio, so I live on one of the Great Lakes, Lake Erie. We don't have a problem with access to water. What I'd like to know, and any of the panelists might answer the question for me, or a number of you, but as you talk about the need for the federal government to provide more money towards water research, and you talk about the smart grids and how we determine how much water we actually use.
Do they put it in ponds, or does it?
If we provide these resources and do this research, how do we then keep the cost of water usage down? Because in our area, where we really don't have any problem with access to water, our water rates are going up significantly. I don't know if it's the technology to read meters. I'm not sure about that, but could you just give me your thoughts on what we could do over time with research to reduce the cost of providing clean water?
I'll take a first cut at that. I'm an economist, and the pricing of water is near and dear to my heart, and I think that the The bad news from the point of view of your constituents is that the price of water is likely to rise in the coming decades, and there's virtually nothing that can be done to make it go down. What can be done is research that will attenuate the rate of increase. Water is now and has historically been underpriced. And one of the things that's going to happen as scarcity intensifies is that the price will rise. The price will also rise because the costs of securing a clean water supply that's safe and healthful will also rise. And I think the fact of the matter is that the citizens of the United States have enjoyed a healthful water supply for over 200 years at less than full cost, and that the reasonable expectation ought to be on the part of citizens that costs more nearly approaching the true costs of water are going to have to be paid in the future. I'm sorry I can't be more optimistic.
If I could add 2 points to that. One is the costs are likely to go up in addition because we expect we're going to have to spend more money to provide clean water. It's a question of reliability, it's a question of availability, and it's a question of quality. There are new contaminants that we don't regulate for, there are new contaminants that we don't remove, and we're going to have to develop technology and apply technology to remove them, and that's going to cost more. On the other side, though, and some of the other speakers have mentioned this, there's a lot of effort going into figuring out how to use water more efficiently. We actually use less water in the United States today for everything than we used 20 years ago. We're becoming more efficient, and as we become more efficient, either in the home, through better appliances, or in industry through better processes, the cost of water can go down. The total cost of water can go down. So we have to match this growing cost for improved reliability of supply and improved quality with the potential to improve the efficiency and reduce our overall demand for water.
Thank you, Ms. Fudge. And Mr. Robacher, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate you holding this hearing. I come from Southern California, and we know how important water is. I am very proud to say that my own county, Orange County, is on the cutting edge of technological development, especially in reclamation of water and conservation of water. And I have been very supportive of those efforts with earmarks for my district. Just wanted to make sure people got that out there. And we also have supported, I've also supported efforts there to make sure that we have the reporting of the purity of the, or not purity, but safety of the water in which the surfers surf in and people have their children swimming in. So I'm very proud of our local area. Let me note, however, just a little slight disagreement. We have not had 200 years of water safety in our country. Water was really in bad condition up until about 50 years ago. I remember when I was young, they wouldn't let me put my finger in the Potomac because my fingernails would fall out. I remember that song back when I was younger. Maybe some of my colleagues remember the song. Our colleague from Cleveland may be too young to remember this, but it was Burn On, Big River, Burn On. And so we have a lot to be proud of in terms of what we've accomplished for water, and I would support the idea of a water census to make sure that we understand the overall goals that we should have as a country as well as standards for purity. I would like to ask a little bit about some of these other things. We do have limited resources, and I think Mr. and I'm how do you pronounce your name, Modzelewski, did make a point that maybe perhaps investment in technology might be better than just putting more money into research. And if you could do some new technologies, for example, if we could make water desalination a little more efficient. We do have problems in our area with water desalination is being opposed by environmentalists because the little fishies might be trapped and then the pelican might not be able to eat the meal that day or something like that. we have to balance those considerations off, pure water versus the pelican getting his meal. But with that observation, could you get in a little bit about this? Where would you put, rather than just research into water, where would you put the money that would actually start making things better? What technologies would you focus on?
Well, rather than necessarily getting highly specific on that, what we tend to be doing right now, if you look at it as a technology portfolio, is we tend to figure out tweaks. We tend to figure out how to make a little bit better membrane, a little bit better type of filtration, a chemical that might not be as hazardous or a means of cutting out something in the system. And it's very bizarre compared to other areas of technology where you look at a wide range of things. Look at energy, for instance, where it's everything from improving how we handle oil to doing something like focusing solar cells to work better and that kind of thing. And we really don't have that in water. There are very few research efforts that are being done on mid to longer range, and that ranges from more efficient desalinization, which right now there's actually a new research effort at Yale on something called forward osmosis, which would be less energy intensive than reverse osmosis. There's a researcher out of Duke University who's actually using biotech techniques for purifying water, so you don't have to use chemicals, and she's actually using RNAi to actually turn off the bacteria and pathogens in water rather than having to put chemical treatments in it that would be harmful and need other treatments and other energy and other usage to get them out. A lot of times what we're doing in water is we're actually putting bad things in. It's sort of like chemotherapy. You're using something horrible to try and kill the disease quicker than the treatment kills you.
Let me note, we also not only have to develop technology, we have to provide our businesses with the incentive to actually utilize that. I visited a plant just 2 days ago in Southern California where the owner of this very small company, it was a medium-sized company, had invested $800,000 in a piece of equipment that purified the water before it went into the, from the plant before it went into the system. That was $800,000, but the depreciation schedule on that was the same for anything else, and we have a depreciation schedule in our country that puts us at a disadvantage compared to the Japanese and others. Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, we could support legislation that would say that for water or other environmental technologies that we can agree upon, that the depreciation schedule for the actual putting that technology into practice at businesses, that we would have a advanced or a shorter depreciation schedule than just for other technologies. That might work very well. And thank you very much for this hearing. And if I could maybe ask one last question, maybe our last witness would like to answer the question about what technologies we should most focus on.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think that there are a number of technologies, if we step back and, per your last comment, look at the system level and understand the total cost to treat of water. There's amazing work going on at institutes, national labs, universities. I'm very aware of some of the work in forward osmosis and so forth. But I think also we need to step back and say, how can we drive down the total energy need for water purification? There's been very minimal investment in energy recovery devices, in devices to look at how can we get more water through with less energy, whether it be pumps, whether it be devices that can take the pressure differential and turn that into energy, or whether it be totally new materials that allow the membranes to work in a totally different way.
Thank you very much. And let me note, with an earmark, I provided funds for Long Beach Water District to develop a new system that is 25% more energy efficient in
Thank you,
in
Mr. Robacher. You can be on our next panel.
Thank you.
And Ms. Edwards is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks to the panelists. It's really good to see Peter Gleick. I've read every one of your biennial water reports, so appreciate meeting you. About 25 years ago, I spent some time at the World Bank really working on tracking the big infrastructure, projects, the dam projects, et cetera, that the bank was funding at the time, purportedly to make sure that we had a world that had a clean water supply. And I don't think we're any closer to a clean water supply now with the expenditure of billions and billions of dollars across the country. One of the questions that I have for you, and perhaps for Ms. Stoner as well, is about what we might do in our own research and assessment here in the United States that takes into consideration what the impact on the world's water supply is and strategies for addressing the world's water supply. And I think, Dr. Gleick, as you pointed out a number of times, the connection between security and water supply is really is deep. We're seeing that right here in our own hemisphere. And so I wonder if you might address ways that we can make investments in research that look at things like climate change and its impact on water and the relationship between neighboring states and our use of water, and if there may be things that we could explore in terms of strategies here in the United States that could have a positive impact on the world's water supply.
Congresswoman, thank you very much for that question. It's a huge question. I don't expect to be able to answer it fully. It's long past time that the U.S. reevaluated not just our own national water policy, but our national water policy in the context of international water issues. We have enormous resources here, intellectual resources, technological resources, financial resources, even given the current financial crisis, to help address the billion people worldwide that don't have access to safe drinking water. I think there's a lot that can be done. In my written testimony, I recommended expanding, perhaps not this particular bill, but certainly bills in Congress to address how the U.S. spends its money and its resources and its efforts at the international level as well. I think it's past time for reassessment, and the goodwill that we could generate internationally with those resources is enormous. I'm not sure it necessarily requires new technology as much as it may require doing more of what we do here in the United States in other places, rethinking how we give foreign aid. Instead of spending $1 billion at the World Bank on a water project, the World Bank and other agencies need to think about how to spend $1,000 in 1 million places. In many parts of the world, $1,000 can be enormously effective at bringing clean water to schools, at bringing hygiene education programs, a whole set of things that we really know how to do in order to solve world water problems, but just haven't done yet. I'd be happy to, I could go on and on about this, but perhaps another time.
Thank you. And Ms. Stoner, I'm curious as well if you could both address this and the relationship between what we're doing here on climate change and how that impacts what's happening with our water and water supply, and particularly the management of it.
I appreciate the opportunity to do that. With respect to your first question, one thing that occurs to me is the development of decentralized wastewater treatment technologies. So in lots of places, other countries, they don't have centralized sewer systems, and that's why many of the people don't have adequate sanitation, and that's why so many people die from drinking polluted water overseas. And we also, about a third of the new buildings, new homes built in the United States actually use decentralized wastewater treatment technologies. And there's lots of benefits to doing that in terms of hydrology and so forth, but often those technologies are not sufficiently advanced to address the full range of water quality issues, for example, nutrient pollution. And so if we were to develop those technologies better in the United States, we would have markets overseas that we could use those for. So we could sort of take advantage of the fact that they're looking at those technologies as a resource for them as well. So that would be one idea and an area that I'd like to see research into advanced decentralized wastewater treatment technologies in the U.S. As far as climate change goes, I think that we have a lot of good information on impacts of climate change on water resources that I referenced in my testimony. But a lot of it is at a global level. The models are not particularly precise as they bring it down to the community level where decisions need to be made about infrastructure investments and so forth. So that's one area. A second area would be in how to adapt to those changes, how to have more resilient water resources in the face of climate change. That's a new area of research that I would urge us to invest in.
Ms. Stoner, if you don't mind, we'll let you provide the rest of that for the record, because we have a lot of folks here, and we would like to try to get them through their questions today, too. And I'm going
Delighted to do so.
be mutually discourteous to everybody as we try to move a little bit faster. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From Nebraska, certainly water is important, and the economics of water, irrigation, municipal, and otherwise. I know that there's huge cost with many things. But Dr. Vaux, if you could elaborate when you say that the price of water has not been accurate regarding the cost, what do you think has been left out?
We talk about both urban users and agricultural users who typically pay the cost of capturing, transporting, and treating the water, but not the scarcity value of the water. In other words, typically in the United States, the scarcity value of water is assigned at 0, and the mistake that entails is that it signals to consumers that water is plentifully available when all of us know that it isn't. So it's the failure of our water pricing structure to reflect the scarcity value, which is what's missing.
What value would you add to that?
What would the scarcity value be? It would be very location specific. Generally speaking, what our studies show is that the scarcity value of water of urban quality would be higher than the scarcity value of water for agriculture, because it has to be treated to such a high degree, and it is therefore scarcer. Therefore, the price is higher.
But is there a percentage that you would offer?
No, I'm very reluctant to generalize about it, because it's going to differ as between Orange County and New Jersey or Orange County and New York City. I'm very reluctant to generalize, because I think it's going to be a different value depending upon where you are.
Okay. Would you agree that many advancements have been made, for example, in irrigation techniques, no-till farming, and other efforts?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, agriculture is, as a generalization, a more efficient user of water today than it was a decade ago or 2 decades ago. And I anticipate that it will become an even more efficient user of water in the future as the competition increases and as farmers figure out ways to be more innovative managers of water.
I appreciate that. I concur with that. Just the observations, rather anecdotal on my part. I'm very impressed with the advancements that have been made just with irrigation practices alone, not to mention other crop rotation and what have you. So I appreciate that. I am encouraged and inspired by what we can still accomplish, and I appreciate your efforts. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Tonko, I'm not picking on you, but if there's no objections, I would like for folks to try to maybe keep it to 4 minutes rather than 5 minutes, so that we can, again, try to let everybody have a chance. So, Mr. Tonko, you're recognized.
I'm sorry. My question is to Ms. Furstoss. As one who represents Schenectady and a lot of GE activity, I'm interested in the fact that you mentioned being a leader, GE being a leading supplier for water treatment, wastewater treatment, process system solutions. Where are these deliveries being made? What countries are we reaching? Is it spread across the globe? Is there a concentration in a certain region?
It truly is global. We have a significant portion of our sales, and I apologize, I don't know the exact number, but can't provide that, in North America, in the United States, specifically in the central region, where there is a majority of heavy industry, and we look to help them on water usage, to minimize their water usage, to purify the waters that are used in everything from steel melting to plastic injection molding, to help them to purify those waters so they can be safely discharged. We do have a large presence also in the Canadian areas, and we are global. So I believe that the majority is in North America, but I would have to be able to get you that exact figure.
And also, I would ask, like, I believe that the President and Congress recently, with the passage of the Reinvestment and Recovery Act, showed great wisdom in investing in pure R&D, clean R&D.
Yes.
Can you share with us, you doubled, I believe, more than doubled in the last 5 years at GE?
We
your
have
investment?
we have more than doubled our investment in what we use as the phrase eco-imagination. So clean technologies, technologies that are focused at energy efficiency, at cleaner water. We have doubled that investment as a company to over $1.5 billion, and we currently have over a dozen products in that portfolio that are directly aimed at clean water.
So in terms of the investment in R&D, what percentage would water be? How can you guess of the 1.5?
It is a very small percentage at this point. I again don't know the exact number, but it's more on the order of about 50 million.
Would you happen to know how much of all of the clean R&D is done here in the United States?
The technology development, the R&D done by General Electric is done vast majority in the United States, well over 3/4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back my time.
Thank you, and Mr. Inglis is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We in South Carolina are becoming more and more acquainted with water shortages, with a drought, and before that we'd been, especially in the lower part of the state, starting to experience some saltwater intrusion into the aquifers that we were gathering a lot of water for places like Hilton Head's development. And so now in the upstate of South Carolina, we're becoming more and more aware of just how precious the resource is, in part because Georgia wants water out of the Chattooga, so they had a little problem down in Atlanta, and I guess that's why they want more water out of the Chattooga. So the folks at the Strom Thurmond Institute at Clemson are looking at preparing a water budget for the state, and I wonder if you might comment on whether this bill would that we're discussing here today would be helpful in that regard, or is that a local matter, or is this something that may be assisted through this bill? Maybe I should ask the chairman about that, but as a panel, the chairman might have an answer. He'll yield himself some time maybe to answer the question, but anybody on the panel want to address local water budgets and whether those might be assisted by this bill?
I'll be happy to answer quickly. In general, water is often a very local issue. If the local expertise is available to evaluate the hydrology, to look at the resources that are there, to look at water use, do it locally. But we need a national assessment everywhere. You're not the only ones with these kinds of problems. These kinds of problems are coming up everywhere. Even places we thought water was plentiful, we realize it no longer is. And so we need a comprehensive assessment of water use and water availability nationwide, which is what this census calls for. The other problem is the political boundaries we have rarely match the hydrologic boundaries we have. We have watersheds that permit conflicts to arise between Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, or Georgia and South Carolina, or Georgia and I'm not picking on Georgia, but the hydrologic boundaries we have and the political boundaries don't match. And that's another reason why it might be useful to get away from local assessments to national assessments that really do these kinds of things at the watershed boundary, so we understand the hydrology, and then perhaps we combine it with the politics.
That's helpful. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Actually, I'll just pick up on that. It's the actual bodies of water, for instance, in the sense of a watershed. You look at something like an aquifer system in the Southwest. It tends to go over the many states with a level of covenants between them, but they tend to have very different laws on how that is operated on. You have a riparian system, you have hybrid systems, et cetera. And what that really gets down to is each state that's drawing from the water has a very different idea of what appropriate use is and how to assign that use to people. And so the water, as the water moves through that watershed, you have a very different usage levels, very different sense of security and a sense of health issues and things along those lines. Until a lot of that is understood or codified or standardized, you're going to continue to have conflict as well.
Yeah. I suppose one of the outcomes of developing a budget or a comprehensive kind of approach like we're talking about here would be mostly one of the key outcomes would be valuing water highly, and that means not wasting it, right, which is probably what all of us do a lot. So was that all? That'd be one of the outcomes of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. And there's been a couple of members of the panel that have suggested the universities should be a part of this, and we'll look at that and see if we can do it in some way. Ms. Cosmos is recognized for 4 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it will be less. I want to say that I appreciate the panels being here today and also appreciate this bill that you're moving forward. I wanted to ask this question of Mrs. Stoner. You stated in your testimony that the 1972 Clean Water Act authorized $100 million in research, and then in the 80s, research and development was systematically reduced as it was argued that the private sector would pick up the slack. In fact, in 84, President Reagan stated that it was time for the states and private industry to take over the job. So my question would be, how has the private sector fared in shouldering this burden without significant federal assistance?
Thank you. I noticed that my colleagues had some different estimates in terms of the R&D spending over the time frame. So I don't know if we had looked at different types of investments or not, but I did notice that they indicated that they also thought additional investment was needed, but that they didn't think the absolute number had decreased. So I call that to your attention. I think that if we had the right markets and could help particularly bridge the gaps through a federal investment between the development of the technologies and their implementation, I think that would help a lot to trigger private investment. So the social science research that we mentioned earlier, identifying how to make the investment smarter on a watershed basis so that every dollar is expended better, and that public support is developed by showing what the value of the investments are. I think that the needs are out there, so what we need to do is to link up the needs with the development of the new technologies and bridge those two.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess the bottom line question is, do you think that additional federal funding needs to be placed in research and development, or do you think then that the private sector is doing its share to bridge the gaps that you've just described?
Well, I agree with my colleague, Dr. Gleick, that there are things that are done better at the federal level, even though everyone is interested in their own local water body. If you don't assess how things can be done on a watershed basis and look at from a broader scope, I think you miss synergies. Also, looking at energy-water nexus, other ways of evaluating investments in water that can also help with energy, climate change, even air pollution. I think those are often things that we miss that can help save money in the long run, provide better environmental benefits, and provide markets for industry.
Thank you very much. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Since Mr. Robacher double-dipped last time, I'm sure he would like to yield to Ms. Dowkemper.
Be very happy to, and I apologize for hogging that extra minute, knowing we're under a schedule problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Rohrbacher. I appreciate this hearing, very timely. I, like Ms. Fudge, live also on Lake Erie. I'm just a little bit further to the east in Pennsylvania. Abundance of water. waste of water, I would say for many, many years, my neighbors sometimes clean their driveways with the hose for over half an hour, and they'll leave their sprinklers on all night long. So, we see a Great Lake out there, and people don't think about the impact that their use is having. And so I guess what my question is, when it comes to water use, what segments of water do you see cause the most concern for you in terms of water use? How will that population growth and migration impact such water use over time? Of course, we think we'll become the place where everyone wants to live eventually because we have water. And also, I guess, tied into that, what portion of the present use or the present water waste could be resolved by reasonable household conservation? And so I guess I just open this up to whoever would like to answer.
Let me take a first crack at that. I would note that of all the people who are most concerned about your neighbor's use of water and looking out over the Great Lakes are probably the Canadians, who worry quite a bit about that. And I know there's a new agreement between the U.S. and the Canadians on the Great Lakes. At the Pacific Institute, we've done a lot of work on this question, specifically on water use efficiency. The quick answer is our estimate is that current urban use of water could easily be reduced by 30 or 35% from today's level with existing technology cost effectively. Better toilets, better washing machines, better dishwashers, more effective and efficient outdoor watering. In many parts of the country, outdoor watering is the majority of residential use. Better industrial use, 30 to 35%. In the agricultural sector, as we've already heard, enormous progress has been made, but enormous progress remains to be made. We did an estimate for California looking at the potential of a 5 to 15% improvement in agricultural water use efficiency, permitting us to grow the same amount of food with less water. And because agriculture consumes 80% of the water that's consumed in the U.S., that small percentage improvement is a lot of water. So the potential for efficiency improvements is enormous.
Would anyone else like to comment?
Let me make one comment about the water quality and the preservation of water quality. There's been a lot of discussion here about the role of technology and about the importance of technology. The missing point has been this one. Virtually every economic study shows that it's cheaper to prevent water contamination in the first place than it is to clean it up once it's occurred. And in seeking a balanced approach to our water quality problems, which will be important in terms of determining how much water supply is available, it will be critical to recognize that prevention must play an important role.
And one thing on the technology front, as far as that goes, is we have to start looking at just our use of water differently. I mean, the driveway analogy is a great one. You didn't need the top quality water from the house that was all clean and went through all the systems to treat that. If we started looking at how we develop technologies where we can reuse and create gray water within our own homes or within neighborhoods or within cities and use another quality of water to handle things like watering lawns and cleaning cars and things along those lines, we'd make a great jump in being able to preserve water. And there are other countries who've been very aggressive at that. The Israelis, the Swiss, Singaporeans have all moved very aggressively on water reuse.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ms. Dockin. Okay, he's not there. And Mr. Hall passes. So, Mr. Lujan, you're recognized for 5 minutes or for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take much time. Thank you to each of you who are here today. I know that there's at least a few of you who have a lot of familiarity with New Mexico and some of the work that's been happening out there. And so I'd like to, pose my question specifically to you. With the creation of the Water Resource Research Institutes in each of our states and territories across the country, specifically the work that is being done in New Mexico or in different regions of the country, the importance of supporting those institutes, if you could explain that. But as well as, is there coordination that's taking place with our universities, our local governments, with those that oversee with state engineers, that oversee small public water utilities, as an example, coordination with the League of Cities and the National Association of Counties. What specifically is working there, and is this a good place to target some of the support when we're talking about the importance for looking at how we can maximize and localize the research and to be able to get the data that we need to be able to make good decisions?
I've been associated with that program in one way or another since 1965, and I think the program does not get very substantial level of funding, about $6 million annually. What it is doing most effectively right now is the communications task and keeping the water resources expertise at all the colleges and universities in each state knit together in ways that I think the chairman envisions for his bill here in the federal government. The research budget is, of course, starved, so that the communications task is the primary one that the institutes are executing effectively, not only within the states, as I just described, but among the states, because there is a national association, an institute in each state and the trust territories, and those people communicate with each other. And there is now an annual 3-year review of those programs, which generates a lot of information about what they are contributing. So and my testimony indicates that I think the Institute program is a useful way to fold in the academic community to this initiative and ensure that the portfolio, which is out of balance with respect to short-term and long-term research, gets rebalanced, because the academic community is really in a better position to do the long-term research.
Mr. Lohan, would you yield to Ms. Gifford for our last question? Then we're by House rules, we're going to have to comment or have to end this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming to testify. I just said earlier this morning in a speech that I think the future wars will be fought not over oil but over water. I mean, this is a very serious topic, and I'm glad that the chairman is addressing this. Generally, like Mr. Lujan, I come from the west state of Arizona. We have a drought, booming population. In terms of a national water policy, I'm not interested in moving to Ms. Dahlkemper's district. Those of us that want to stay in the West, that like the Southwest, realize that we're going to have different policies that affect us compared to different states. So, could members of the panel talk about how we implement a national water policy when the West is going to be disproportionately affected because of climate change?
There are things that we have to do at the national level, and there are things we have to do at the local or regional level. Certainly, better management of water in the West, when you talk about an integrated Colorado River system, for example, which affects Arizona enormously, is a regional issue with national pieces to it. But we don't want 50 state standards for water quality. We don't want 50 state standards for the efficiency of appliances. So the important thing to do here, and I think one of the important things this bill tries to address, is to decide what needs to be done at the national level and to do it as efficiently as possible, to integrate the research across the 25 or so federal agencies that do research in an appropriate way, and to leave the rest of the stuff for the local level and the state level. There are things that the Western U.S. is going to have to do on its own. There are things that the U.S. government ought to do differently in the West as well. It depends on the issue, it depends on the region, but I think that separation is critical.
Thank you very much. The joint session is just about to begin, so I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee this morning. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for answers to all the follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. You can see this is an issue of interest, and this committee is now adjourned.